welcome to this second webinar for finalists of the Ignite Accelerator. We are very glad that you guys are all here. Just a little bit of orientation and structure. We're going to have sort of a recap of the Tuesday webinar. In case you missed it, the full links and slides from that webinar are actually up on the main Ignite webpage for your later viewing. But we'll do a sort of a recap of the core concepts that were presented there. And then we've got some alumni that are going to be coming in a bit to sort of talk about their experience. Our hope is that this particular webinar is going to be a little bit more dialogue oriented with Dean and Edmund from the University of Maryland providing sort of the lead instruction around this program. You know, the last webinar was sort of, it was a lot of sort of one-way communications and sort of like an introduction to the methodologies, introduction to the jargon, introduction to the various tools and techniques. And our hope here is that you've had a little bit of a chance to absorb that information, and then we'll recap that a little bit and then provide a space for you to really be able to ask all your questions. Your questions could, of course, be around those methodologies, those tools and techniques. And then your questions can be around sort of the administrative and programmatic elements as well, right? So if you've got questions about sort of the Ignite program and things you can or can't do, certainly feel free to raise those. And then I think a portion of this will be centered around sort of strategy, and that strategy could be around your project or a strategy around sort of operating from your particular place in government, because this is all a little bit different, it's all a little bit new for many of you. What might be useful, though, is before we dive too much into that, for the two people that you're looking at now that Will and I just briefly introduce ourselves, get a little bit of sense as where we come from and our background. Will, you want to go first?
Sure. I turn my webcam off.
Are you there?
So I want to make sure people can hear.
Yeah, I can see you.
Oh, I'm muted right now.
Well, but you're using the phone. It's like right here.
Oh, that's right. We're on a phone too.
Will and I are actually.
All right. I like the least qualified to be doing this. Okay. Yeah, my name is Will Yang. Reed as part of it, this created this thing called HHS Ignite. Back when I first got here, I'd just been transitioned from being an intern in business school to a full-time employee within this group called OBMT. I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, prior to business school, was working with sort of a media and strategy, digital consulting kind of role with a lot of startups and a lot of entrepreneurs. And I will say that a lot of the passion and the sort of the tone of working with people like that is carried over into this kind of role. I don't know if you all realize it, but you're sort of being asked to take on this persona of like an entrepreneur, and because you're trying to do something really impactful and really different. And that's something I really appreciate, and I appreciate that you all are here and enthusiastic and engaged, because you're taking it a lot for yourself, and it's obviously there's a ton of benefits to you, not only just like the kind of things that you'll learn, but just what we've seen as far as how people learn just stuff, but they also take on a different mindset that they didn't have before, and they also like just get swag. They see their way out of so many problems, and they continue to use this mindset, and so it develops people in so many different ways, and just for us to be there and see that happen is great. The projects themselves have great impact, great outcomes, but to me and to us, I think it's really about you. It's about what you get out of it. There's beyond this project too. We want to see what happens with you guys, because it's so far been really cool to watch.
So you've got mainly a business background.
Oh yeah, that was what I was supposed to talk about. Yeah, so it's a business background. There's also a part of my background is in facilitation and design methodology. So yeah.
Yep. And hi, I'm Reed, here in the IDEA Lab as well, and the program director. We sort of got a couple programs that make up collectively what we refer to as our innovation pipeline. So if you're familiar with the Ventures Fund, that's sort of part of this as well. I have been with HHS for almost 7 years now. I have a public health degree and sort of policy background, and fell into the world of sort of technology and communications I was in public affairs here with HHS for a couple of years. I was in CMS for a couple of years, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, standing up their digital shop, and have been here within the IDEA Lab since, well, I guess before it was officially the IDEA Lab. So it's been about 2 years for that. So it's important to probably mention here that neither Will nor I are officially like experts in any of this stuff. We are not by any means we don't have like formal long backgrounds and trainings in the things that we are talking about. We've relied heavily upon the University of Maryland faculty for sort of a lead instruction and the big guidance. But over the course of the last 4 rounds, we're now entering the 5th round, we've become more accustomed and familiar with all the methodologies, the tools, techniques, and have had quite a bit of exposure, I think, to the various challenges and problems within government, and have helped people navigate it. So we do come across, or we do try to sort of, communicate the tools and techniques, but most of the time we prevent them with a grain of salt, that we are not like super experts, and you should feel free to challenge us on all things. All right, so with us out of the way, we're going to do a quick recap of the items that Dean and Edmund covered, and I'm hoping to, oh, that's funny. Okay, so I'm hoping to fly through these in about 10 minutes or so. So the fundamental question that we're trying to ask, and that the IDEA Lab as a whole is trying to answer, is why don't ideas take off, right? So, and this applies beyond just your ideas within government, but their ideas in the private sector as well. These ideas form into startup companies, and some of them work and take off, and a lot of them don't. Within government, we're trying to answer this question, and for us, there are a number of reasons. There are 2 in particular that we tend to focus on. One is that, well, sometimes they're bad ideas, and it's okay to have bad ideas. I have a lot of bad ideas, and part of the process is to figure out which ones are good and which ones are bad all along the way. The second item is that sometimes you have a really good idea that's poorly communicated, and this is particularly true, for the federal government is lucky to have some of the premier experts in certain subject areas in the world that are here working and solving some really critical problems. But we all sort of get trapped along the way in our own particular world and our own particular jargon. And to be able to communicate up and to be able to communicate out to people who aren't familiar with your world is critically important. And the Ignite program and even the things over the next 2 months that you'll be working on during this finalist stage are going to be trying to address this item as well. This is a curve that Edmund put out. This is just noting that the vast majority, I think the stat was 98% of all startups end up failing, and that our goal is to, 1, empower you to think of yourself as a startup, and 2, I guess I mean sort of recognize that a lot of you guys are going to quote-unquote fail. We like to call that learning, which is totally fine. And our goal here is to help shift that curve so that a higher percentage of you can indeed get your idea adopted and have that idea take off. Some principles and concepts that were introduced. There are 3 words here: customer segmentation, value proposition, notion of customer interviews. I think I'm going to be flying through each of these just again as a recap. The customer segmentation piece, so they were broken out into 2, 4, 6 items here, and it's probably important to note that we raised another one, right? The notion of beneficiaries. Beneficiaries are not on this list per se. The other item that actually comes up in conversation a lot are subject matter experts. So when you're thinking about going out and conducting these customer interviews, many people have an inclination to go reach out to the subject matter expert. And that's fine. They're an item on the list here. But we don't really call them customers. They may be part of the larger stakeholder landscape or something, but they certainly are distinct from these other items that are listed. So if we sort of take those out, they weren't mentioned yesterday. You know, we bucket the bottom tier as sort of stakeholders, and your focus over the next 2 months is to really figure out who are these end users. And that's, sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not obvious, sometimes it takes a number of conversations with people to actually figure out who are the end users all along the way. And there are a couple of ways you can be thinking about you know, trying to figure out who are these end users as distinct from the beneficiaries or as distinct from these other groups. And one way to think about it is that it's the person with the problem that you're trying to solve. The other way to think about it, and this is something that give credit to Will Yang here for, that it's the person whose behavior you want to change. At the end of the day, we're all trying to change somebody's behavior. It could be an internal, you know, internal colleague who is, you know, operating within your system, and you're trying to get them just to, like, maybe you're logging data. Maybe you manage a system where they log data and they're not logging data correctly, right? You're trying to change their behavior so that they can log their data correctly. Or maybe it's an external stakeholder. You're working with industry, or you're working with consumer groups. There are various behaviors that you're trying to change. So this is not meant to be like manipulative or anything along those lines, but just acknowledging that you know, there's somebody that you're working with, you're trying to get them to do something a little bit differently. You know, that's most likely your end user. I should probably actually pause here quickly and just, I meant to mention at the beginning, so we've got this questions panel within the GoToWebinar control panel that everybody has access to. So you should feel free, by the way, to just post questions. Will is monitoring this along the way, and he's gonna, you know, interrupt me as they come in.
Come on.
We've got 10 as the number that we're putting on front of you. All right, so as you're exploring your end users, trying to figure out who those folks are, you know, a core part of the methodology here within Ignite is to have these conversations, to conduct these quote-unquote customer interviews. And one thing you may think about is try to get to 10 over the next 2 months. You know, every project is different. Sometimes 10 is a reach. It's like hard to think about who those 10 people might be. Sometimes 10 is just a drop in the bucket compared to the bigger number of end users that are out there. But aim for 10. You know, see where you get, and you'll probably gain quite a bit of insight, I think, from just those conversations. Okay, so that's customer segmentation.
So there are a couple questions.
Yeah, no, that's a great time to pause and.
So there are a couple, like this is Will again. There are a couple of sort of really either very specific or they're kind of just very pointed questions. Okay. And I think we'll get to them. So don't think I'm skipping you if you don't hear me ask your questions. But there is stuff that there's definitely applies to everyone right now. So one of them is from Juliet. Talking to end users, is the deadline to do this by the January session?
Great question, and yes is the answer. You know, and actually, I've got a little bit of a slide on this coming up, but the idea is you've got your pitch the second week of February. We don't have those quite scheduled yet, but you know, that'll be the week in which it occurs. And we're going to be asking you about how the interviews went, who you talked to, did you learn anything? So that's sort of the major milestone. Now you're probably going to want to build in a week, maybe 2, to actually figure out what your pitch is. You know, to really work on the presentation during that for that pitch. So you figure out exactly how you want to kind of line those conversations and interviews up. But you're going to want to try to do these all within the finalist phase.
Another question. So for the 10 interviews with stakeholders do not count? That's from Lewis.
Well, you know, it's hard for us to just provide really big, hard, strong rules that everybody must adhere to. Rather, we just try to provide information and guidance, and then it's up to each of you to figure out what's actually the best use of your time. You know, we found that the most useful conversations are the ones with the end users. You can have useful conversations with other stakeholder types, those decision makers, those skeptics, subject matter experts.
I think the truth is that the bottom line is you care. The truth is that you care most about, if I create this thing, will anyone even use it? That's like the sort of the clearest sign of value.
That's like who's going to use it.
So because you can get somebody to agree to pay for your thing, because that's also a major stakeholder you need to take care of as a decision maker. But at the end of the day, that decision maker may have nothing to do with the actual use, and may not be able to give you the best perspective as far as how valuable it is, how in demand your solution would be.
Yeah, there is an element of volume here as well. So like if you do 2 interviews with 5 different stakeholder groups, you're sort of scattering, the information out there versus sort of diving into and doing 10 interviews with just one stakeholder group, or with just your interviews. But you're just going to glean more insights. That's what we found.
I think that if you start to feel like you need to talk to some people because they will give you the best idea of whether or not your idea is valid, then you're already sort of on the wrong foot. You want to talk to people who, more so who you need to know, like, are you going to use this? Because that's really your first test. If your solution, your idea doesn't pass that first test, you're not validating even your problem exists with those people first, then you might just be solving for a non-issue.
Yeah. Oh, any other questions you want to dive into?
A couple more questions. I substitute stakeholder or gatekeeper for end user when I hear it. Is there any exception to that I'm not thinking of? That's from Jim. Thanks.
Say that again.
So Jim asks, I substitute the term stakeholder or gatekeeper for end user when I hear it. Is there any exception to that I'm not thinking of?
Yes, part of this is just sort of semantics. It depends on how you're defining each of these things. So this is how we define things. So stakeholders is a bucket of folks.
Yep.
It's the broader category, and there are various types of stakeholders. The broadest category for us is, we call them customers, and then there are various customer segments underneath that. End user being one customer segment. So a lot of people think that like management is their end user because they're like a gatekeeper, they need approval. Most of the time they're not an end user, but they're like they're actually a gatekeeper. That's actually an interesting word. You almost want to put that on here. They're like a gatekeeper internally, but they're not always the end user, right? The end user being, where's my other slide? The end user being the person whose behavior you're ultimately trying to change. So Jim, it's an interesting question. I hope that helped clarify things.
There's a handful more. Question from Mitra. Can someone from your team help us with the pitch? We will create it, but is there someone that can hear us before we do our official pitch in February?
Yes. The answer is most definitely yes. The January webinar happening on the 12th from 1 to 3. Everybody, at least the project leads, have received a meeting invite for that. That is a training specifically on storytelling and making the pitch, and then we're going to have a number of opportunities for you to give practice pitches, sort of activate the local alumni network, try to line those up for you. So how about why don't we dive into value prop, and then we can go back to the questions. Okay, so the other concept, so this was customer segmentation. End users, try to aim for 10. One of the other terms that was brought up yesterday was the notion of value proposition. And this is how it was defined: the benefits your customers derive. And then there was a particular focus on the word benefits, right? So, and this was, I don't know if this was Edmund's quote or if he was quoting somebody else, but it's really important to realize that your end users, your customers, they don't really care about your idea, right? So they have problems, and they just want those problems solved. And our hope is, your hope, is that you actually offer the thing that helps them solve that problem, whether it's a service, whether it's a product, whether it's perhaps some sort of guidance material or a product or something along those lines. and all this, so you're talking to your customers, trying to figure out sort of your role in their ecosystem. And the biggest thing, during this initial phase is you want to try to avoid hitting that like #1 startup mistake. And it's the same mistake that we see in Ignite, and it's the notion that people end up building something nobody wants. They may say that they want it, so that's like initial validation. But another way to word this is that you're actually solving the wrong problem. So we think that this person really wants X. It's even possible that like the literature suggests that that type of person might want that thing. But what you really want to be sure is that that thing is not just something that they want, but is actually something they really want, that it meets a problem that they have. So this is what we're trying to get everybody to do here in this final stage is, again, just like go out and talk to the customers. And so slight modifiers on the language here, you certainly want to understand their problem, but you want to understand like their biggest problem. And in fact, we're often seeking that like hair on fire problem, the thing that like keeps them up at night. They're not just their pain points, but their biggest pain points. The notion being, if you could help solve like their biggest problems or help address their biggest pain points, then you're making their life easier, and you're able to really be able to adjust and tweak their behavior. It's certainly important to recognize that although we're calling you startups and these are quote unquote new ideas, that many of you have probably been working on these for a long time, and that's great that you have this history. Many of you have a lot of data, many of you have read the literature, and you've been talking to your customers all along the way. That's great. We still want you to go through this. I guess sort of my cheeky response to a lot of this is if you really understand the customers and you know this information, then well, why are you here, right? You should have probably should have gotten the idea off the ground and be running with it. So again, right, a couple of reasons why ideas don't take off. Good ideas poorly communicated. To that second point, again, the communication being really element, not just in a pitch, not just in communication with leadership, but certainly communication during your interviews as well. So Dean went through these 7 tips. I'm not going to read them out loud again. You guys can all see the slides. Go back through his slides also. He provided some really great cartoons that I thought illustrated in a funny way, like pretty common pitfalls. The notion that you're like leading, the interview, the interviewee, that you are, pushing your solution a little early, before asking about their problems and really understanding what their world is like. And that's really what you're trying to do, right? To really like get to know them. We have found that the phrase customer interview is a little intense for some people.
Okay, so for some reason, I think the video feed is frozen. I think people are not seeing the slides that you think they're seeing.
Oh.
So there's
well, that's probably because I didn't hit that play button. Oh man, what were they looking at?
Oh man. Okay, they still think it's on slide number 27.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. So these are all going to be made available again. What I will do, sorry about that, guys, is...
Okay, it's working now.
Yeah, I just hit there's a button that I hit. Here, those 7. I'll hold on this slide again. We're sort of talking about the how to communicate to your customers in interviews. Dean had some really great tips in there. He had some really funny cartoons. We did find that the phrase customer interview is probably a little too formal. So we, especially at this early stage, try not to over-formalize this whole thing. It's probably better just to call them casual conversations instead of interviews. If it's somebody that's nearby and you can just like grab them and go to a coffee shop, that's really best. Yeah. And then the idea is that over time, as you get to know the ecosystem more, you can start to formalize them a little bit more, but that'll be something that you shouldn't have to worry really about quite yet. It's probably a good place for me to pause again, see if there are any questions aside from questions about the technical issue that I brought up.
So there's been a handful of really cool questions.
Yeah.
First is I'll answer this really quickly from Angelica. What's the best practice for preparing with the interviews? For example, is there an interview guide, etc.? I would say that the best thing you can do to prepare for interviews is just start with people that you kind of already know. If there's kind of end user types who you already know well, and the pressure can be sort of little, and you can tell them, hey, this is a learning experience for me too. It might be clunky. That's fine. And then in general, what Reed was saying is you sort of take some of the pressure out of the conversation by saying, hey, this is like, let's just chat over coffee, instead of like, I'm going to interview you and maybe tape record you or something like that. Just try not to do that. Yeah,
a couple like minor things, and this would be a great question for the panel that's coming up. There's also a desire to like write down everything they say. If you have a second person that's there with you, then I think that's fine. It makes sense. Otherwise, don't worry too much about writing everything down at this point. You may want to capture, some key elements in advance, or if they say something super interesting, you can write that down. And instead, like following the interview, right after the interview, think about like, what are there 3 key insights that you learned from that, and then you can jot those down after the interview. But again, like coffee conversation, that's sort of where we are right now, and just sort of get to know them and better understand how they interact with your ecosystem.
All right, another great question is from Mary. What if you have several customer end user groups? Do the interviews help to winnow them down to select primary group, or could an innovation be a process that could be adapted for use with a variety of groups? So
great question.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because it can go any direction. A prototype can help you explain a problem as much as it can help you vet a solution. It can help you communicate in a way that you couldn't before. It'll help you identify different users that you couldn't know before. But simply talking to people and understanding them, and we have you think in terms of personas, and thinking in terms of persona is basically saying like, all right, this is the kind of person who might have this kind of issue or unmet need that we think, and what do we know about that kind of person? Can we try to profile that person to understand? And if so, we've profiled well enough, we can also start to see the differences between our end users, and that they care about different things, they get different benefits from the things that we're showing them.
If you're starting to like see distinction between sub-segments of end users, that's awesome. Because you can even imagine sort of, a semi-advanced levels, like each sub-segment has its own little value proposition or its own pain point that you're trying to address. Start to jot those down, and if you're at that level, by February when you give me your pitch, then you're going to be in a really good spot.
Another great question is from Diane. We get this a lot. Do the interviews need to be one-on-one, or could you use a focus group format?
Oh, great question. This is one that comes up quite a bit, and always generates quite a bit of discussion. We encourage one-on-one conversations, and the reason is sort of the notion of groupthink. Now, when I was trained, actually, in my school of public health, we talked a lot about focus groups, and that's sort of the common tool out there
for social science.
For social sciences, and there's a place and a role perhaps for those focus groups. We don't want you to do any focus groups, right? So a lot of times people are like, oh, if I do one focus group with 10 people, that's the same as having 10 conversations with 10 people, and that ends up not really being the case. You always have people within a focus group that are quieter, and you have people that are louder, and there's a normalizing of opinions that come along with group dynamics. And what you want to do is actually dive into each individual person so that you can better understand the various, opinions or thoughts or pain points within the group. Really be sure you're pulling out those individual things, and then you can imagine later on sort of synthesizing and bringing those things together. But the short answer to this is avoid focus groups at this point, and really focus on one-on-one, maybe like one-on-two types of conversations.
So, man, there's just so many awesome questions. This one's sort of administrative side from Chris. He asked yesterday, or on Tuesday, so I wanted to make sure we got to this. Did the panels that reviewed the applications provide feedback, and do we get to see that?
Oh, good question. Well, let's see. They scored all the proposals. The problem is that we don't necessarily have those anonymized.
If you ask specifically, we'll be happy to get into it and share.
Yeah, reach out to it. So there were some comments that were provided. The main thing we'd be able to communicate back out of the scores based upon the criteria. So you can see if you were like weaker on average for one criteria versus another. If you're really interested in that, email the IDEA Lab email address, idealab@hhs.gov, and we'll pull that out for you.
There are so many good questions, and I know that we have time issues.
Yeah, so maybe we can save some of those for the panel.
That'd be great. Actually, we'll let the panel get into some of these questions because they have a very, very good perspective on them too. Okay. So it's panel time, isn't it?
Well, I've got like 3 more slides, I think, and then panel time. So just a quick, and this actually helps provide, I think, a nice recap on the recap. Compare and contrast sort of standard government versus our Ignite way of doing things. And it's a broad sweeping strokes, obviously lots of variations among that quote-unquote standard government approach. But just to really like highlight the differences and hone in on our methodology and approach here. Experts versus customers. Often we get this all the time when people are like, they're saying, we know this is a great idea because the literature says X. Literature is good, it's useful. But in those conversations, we're more interested in hearing about what the customers have to say than the literature. Third bullet here, and it's related to the second, is data is good. Stories are also very good. And we're interested in customer quotes, customer feedback, sort of the qualifiable type, the non-quantifiable type, if you will. Standard government approach is you're trying to solve like the biggest problem. You're trying to like save the children, boil the ocean. Within Ignite, scoping down becomes really, really important. In part because it's sort of a time issue, right? It's a very short program. So we're going to be pushing people to just like, well, that's a really big problem. Can we drill down to a smaller one that's perhaps a little more actionable? And then the last one, just to mention, is the notion of surveying and worrying about statistical validity and high N value, low P value. All that stuff has its place, but it does not have its place at this phase of an Ignite-like project. And in fact, we threw 10 out there, and that's a goal. That's something you're going to want to aim for. But most of the time, you have 7 good conversations with the right people, and that's going to be sufficient to really be able to see themes you can start taking action on. We got some strategery notes. I'm not going to really go into this just for the sake of time. This is where I was going to mention that storytelling and making the pitch. So start to think about sort of your calendar. If you haven't seen this yet, this is the main Ignite webpage. There's a tab on there that's called Being a Finalist, and at the bottom we have a whole bunch of materials for you guys, and including everything from the last webinar. It's already posted. We'll post all this information up there as well. 2 things I'll highlight. One is this: we have a PDF there of all the former project leads. If you're a project lead, you want to sort of connect with the alumni network, pull that up. It's oriented, I think, by Optiv, so you can reach out to an Optiv person. But this is actually sort of a smaller subsection of all of that. So in addition to just project leads, being part of the community, we've got others that are more on like the innovation coaching and or mentorship side of things. This is actually not posted yet as an individual file. We can actually pull this out and do that, but we've got this broken down a little bit by geography / Optiv. So these are other people you may want to consider reaching out to. Just another sort of administrative item. We've mentioned this multiple times. Yep, you can change your project along the way. Yep, you can change your team along the way. We've got a couple requests about like, can we change even the team lead, project lead? The answer is yes. If you want to make that dramatic of a change, then go ahead and email us that as well. As you've noticed, we just communicate with the project leads, and we leave it up to them to sort of manage their situation. This is a website called Open Opportunities, and it's something I won't dive in too much, but openops.digitalgov.gov, it's a place managed by GSA, and you can post your project if you're seeking team members. You can post your project and the type of person you're looking for, and there's a community of people that are out there that might jump in to volunteer. So something to keep in your back pocket. And this is a Mad Lib. If you're looking for a tool to help sort of synthesize and organize your thoughts and perhaps even crystallize sort of what you're doing, this is the Mad Lib. This is posted on the Ignite webpage. We think it's pretty useful. Fill this out. You'll probably be tweaking this all along the way over the last 2 months. As an insider tip for your project pitch, the only thing that we're really going to require in that February pitch is actually that you show us your Mad Lib. So this will be like your opening slide, basically, and it'll be a great point of discussion for us. Okay, so that's a lot. We're going to move on to our panel, but actually maybe before we do that, it might be useful just to like have a couple-minute break. We're going to get the panel set up. We'll let you guys sort of stretch your legs. If you've been in downward-facing dog the whole time, you may want to go in upward-facing dog. Tish, you missed the earlier comment. And so let's see, it's 1:43 right now. Let's reconvene at like 1:46. We'll aim for that. We'll put some things on mute, but we'll otherwise just sort of be sitting here for a few minutes getting things set up. All right. Thanks, guys. Talk to you in a second.
You guys hear me? I can't hear you.
Hey there, everybody.
Hey, I can hear you.
Hello.
I just unmuted you guys.
There we go.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Tish was able to make it down.
Hey,
Hi, Tish.
Jamie. Hey, Daniel.
Hey, Tish. Looking good.
Thank you. Feeling good.
So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes or so listening to your guys' elevator pitches, right? And then
I think we're live, by the way. Everybody can still hear.
it's all right.
Okay.
I'm kidding. We're not going to do that.
No, we can.
I think to give a short background on your project would be good. Then there's awesome questions from audience, and then we also had some canned questions as well.
Nervous.
Jamie, really?
Yes, I'm really nervous.
You look cool as a cucumber.
I really like that you took this so seriously. You put a tie on, and I'm pretty sure you're still at home.
I'm
Not wearing pants.
Not wearing pants.
Hey, Reed's wearing a tie. Nobody's talking about that.
Reed's in the.
I wear a tie.
Reed's in the office.
It's actually in my comments of things to talk about. That says wear a tie.
All right, you guys
All right, we'll
want to dive into things?
let Reed take us back in.
146, boss.
Everybody out there is like, what in the world are they doing?
Yeah, I know.
Who are these crazy people? Why did I sign up for this program?
It's too late.
It is too late. Point of no return.
All right. Welcome back. I guess that's how we'll segue into this. So this is going to be, this is actually pretty cool. We've got a number of alumni here that have joined us. Will's going to be moderating this. I guess you can keep track of questions, but I'll keep an eye on the questions panel as well as they come up. So I guess I'll just hand it off to you, Will.
Yeah, sure. So I'm joined here by Tish next to me. Dan is in Atlanta, right? And Jamie's somewhere in Maryland, I think. Anyway, these guys are all stellar former Igniters, and then some actually for a couple of them. But they have a really good perspective on what it is to have done Ignite and understand all the principles behind it. That's why I brought them back. I guess I'll let you guys introduce yourselves a tiny bit and maybe spend 15 seconds or 30 seconds just talking quickly about the project that you did, if you can still pull off the elevator pitch after all this time.
I should be able to, but no. So I'll get started, guys, because I'm the girl, and girls first. And so my name is Engram. I'm with the Administration for Children and Families in the Office of Trafficking in Persons. And our project was Now You See Me, a human trafficking data collection project to galvanize HHS resources. And we started out with our project wanting to develop a case management tool, and we realized that we needed a human trafficking data tool. And so our project, we were able to identify lots of issues that we need to deal with before we get to data collection. But that's it.
Dan?
Hey, Dan Stowell. Special shout out to the people in Atlanta. I'm just a few floors up from you. So I was involved in kind of spinning up a type of innovation lab here at CDC. It kind of came from like the human-centered design background, and we had this idea to kind of use some of those techniques to build creative confidence in our organization. About halfway through, I split off from that project, and that project is still going through, and then ended up coming up to the HHS IDEA Lab for a few months and having them mentor me, and I helped out on a few of their projects, including Ignite and coaching and mentoring some teams. So thanks for having me on.
Hey guys, Jamie Elliott. I work in HRSA up in Rockville, Maryland. And I was with the second round of Ignite in 2014. I had never done anything with innovation. I was just good at asking an annoying level of questions. I was tasked to run a team that reviewed applications. What we ended up doing was integrating our system to pull loans automatically over from the Department of Education, help streamline some things, and improve program integrity. After that round of Ignite, I was lucky enough to come back to the IDEA Lab on a small detail and be an instructor, or I guess a coach, for 3 or 4 teams. I can't remember. Sorry, guys. I think it was 4 teams, and that was from January to April. That was a lot of fun, and really, really happy to be here. So thanks.
Cool. All right, so I'll pose a question that I want to get into a few things, but the biggest thing is, you have a lot of people on the line who are not sure what they're getting into right now, and I'm pretty sure some people might be scared. If you are worried, then you're probably in the right place. There's a lot of stuff that we've been throwing at you. But I guess on their behalf, like, what was the one thing that you wish, somebody had told you before you started?
We start with me?
Yeah, sure, Jamie, yes.
All right. I've thought about this, and I'm sorry I came up with 3 things. Not that you guys didn't tell me enough in the beginning, but I'll make them quick. First of all, embrace the methodology. Don't just think about going into Ignite to solve your problem, but think about what they're teaching you and how it can help you solve every problem. Secondly, understand the problems that are in front of you and that may be in front of you over the next months, because you're not going to be able to solve all of them. So use the resources around you, like Reed and Will especially. They can help a lot when it comes to getting through some tough periods. And lastly, wear a tie. Always wear a tie. For a couple reasons, mainly because it says to other people that what you're doing you think is important, and secondly, it'll drive Reed crazy. But that's it.
I'm not wearing a tie. What is that? I don't think it's important.
And I'm not wearing a tie either.
Tish isn't wearing a tie.
And
you didn't count on us on webcam.
For themselves. I don't have
I think
to
Jamie would be wearing a tie whether or not we were going to be webcamming. Okay. Well, Daniel, you want to take that next? Thanks so much, Jamie.
Yeah, I think Jamie made some awesome points. Definitely reiterating the embracing the methodology. I think that they've seen a lot of teams go through this process before, and they know what to expect. And a lot of teams that the earlier on that they embrace the methodology, I think a lot of times that ends up paying dividends by the time they're leaving the program, because they've gotten so much farther than the teams that kind of resist it. I guess I'll just mention the one thing which I think that Ignite is super awesome at that the rest of Gov doesn't typically offer you, and it's kind of helps you answer the only question that kind of really matters, and kind of like, is your product or is your process something that people want? And I think that we don't really spend enough time on that, and through this process of Ignite, I think by the end of this, you will really know who, where, and when your product is actually wanted, and what the actual market is for it. With that in mind, you're going to have to go figure that out. Ignite, the mentors, the coaches, the brilliant people working at the IDEA Lab, they're all awesome, but they're not going to tell you what people want. That's going to be something that you really have to figure out, and I think that's kind of the exciting part about Ignite. I think that's some of the most fun, and that's kind of what drew me to the IDEA Lab. Kind of really enjoying and being able to funnel that passion into my job, but it's going to be tough work.
And Tish?
Well, I don't want to echo what they're saying, but I think what's really important is to let go of every single thing you think you know coming into the project. And then the word is possibilities. So I think listening at the tail end of Reed's presentation, if we had it all together and we knew exactly what it was, then we wouldn't be in the project, in the program. But there's so many things just by listening and not hearing what people say and trying to jot everything down, but really absorbing and engaging with the customer segments in a way that helps you understand and get into their world. All of that is going to be synthesized in some way, believe it or not, and in the end, it will work out into a product that's not just 50% of the solution, but like really going for 100% of the solution. And so the best advice is to let go of everything you think you know, just file that away, but really be open to listening and engaging with the customer segment so you can really hear and understand what the possibilities are.
Great. That's all really awesome. So what I think we're going to do is that was sort of a canned one. I'm going to go back and forth between some of those ones and then what people, audience members are asking. So Nick Weber asked a really cool question about any suggestions for getting to prospective end users or finding them. Who do you know who to talk to, or how do you get to them? How do you get to them when they might not be readily accessible, or even many know them by name or by face? You want to take that, Tish?
Yes, I will start. I think one thing, if you can find one person, one as close to the community as the lowest denominator, the farthest reaching person that's in the field, on the ground, doing the work, then you will basically get word of mouth. I started in this, I knew very little about trafficking at all, because I came from an agency, and I've been working in an agency, and I knew everything there was to know about that program. But trafficking was very different, and it just took one or two key people to talk to and really get in their world, and then it was word of mouth. I literally did not plan most of the visits and the interviews that I had. Like, that's how I operate, and I had to be okay with saying, I'm coming to the city. Do you mind if we have a few minutes to talk about it, and it just went from there. And once folks understand that you're really engaged and really want to hear what's going on with them, they'd be more than happy to route you to other people. And it's kind of ebbing and flowing with that.
I'd like to also jump in and say social media. As most of you know, most of us know, that social media is a mecca for people to post about their problems. And if you get on places like Yammer or LinkedIn and ask people if they have this problem, you'll get an amazing response. I just found a notary in my building using Yammer. So use Yammer, use LinkedIn, and then use Read and Will, and they'll help you find those folks as well.
Yeah, I agree. The way that we did it, I think, is it's a little bit of a trial and error process, like Tish, is that you kind of stumble along to find the first couple end users, and there's a snowball effect where you actually start meeting people pretty easily. So sometimes the biggest hurdle is just finding the first one or two, and you'd be surprised how quickly you get to the end users after that.
So staying a little bit on interviews, since that's really top of mind right now. I think that most people agree that interviews are really intimidating if you haven't done them yet. So I guess the question is sort of, what was the biggest sort of thing maybe the biggest misconception you had about interviews, and maybe the biggest mistake you made early on? Going back to, I guess, Daniel, this is how we're doing. We're doing Snake. We're going back and forth.
Yeah, biggest misconception. My misconception was that I was supposed to talk a bunch. And that sounds pretty obvious, and I think you've heard Will, Reed, Dean, and possibly Edmund at this point say that you should be doing more listening than you should be doing talking. But sometimes when you get nervous, some people shut down, some people talk a little bit more, and I was on the talk a little bit more side. So it's kind of getting comfortable with that silence and kind of doing the interviews does require some skill, and you pick that up along the way, and there's a learning curve, and so for me it was kind of listening more than talking. So that was my biggest stumbling block.
Very cool. Either Tish or Jamie, if you have any pressing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, this is really funny, and I thought I needed to download this software, and I was going to take people's photos and write down feverishly while they were talking. And I probably did that and typed up my notes like after the first couple of interviews, and after that I was like, this is not going to work, especially not in human trafficking because of the sensitivity of the topic. So it was letting all of that go, the structure, and again, just really being engaged, and the insights and the themes kept reoccurring over and over again. That's what we were looking for.
Yeah, for me, it was that I assumed that everyone thought that the problem I had was everybody's problem, and I was like, yeah, doesn't this make sense? And they didn't get it. So, or they disagreed, or they thought maybe it wasn't as important as I thought it was. And so it a little bit converse to what Dan said, like I had some explaining to do, but then I had to stop once they got what I was trying to say. I had to stop and listen to them to see if they actually validated my problem or if there was another problem, something more important.
Jumping off what Jamie said was kind of get psyched to hear stuff that you don't want to hear. And I think that was a big realization for me, was that you're supposed to be learning things, and you're supposed to be, whatever, a lot of times they say, invalidating your hypotheses. That's kind of getting you into the more experimental mindset than the kind of like the set mindset you came in with. But yeah, get psyched to hear that stuff that you didn't expect, or that you didn't think, or that kind of challenged your assumptions.
Awesome, really awesome, guys. So there's a question from Bob. I understand that you don't want to lead the conversation by selling your solution, and rather should focus on getting input. But how broad is too broad for you to frame the discussion? Basically, like, how do you get that big pain point, or how do you start? For somebody who probably hasn't done it, what are your guys' thoughts? And did you have that same feeling going in? Anybody can jump on that.
I'll start. I think if there's nothing too broad. I've the best question is, tell me a little bit about how you do your work, and just understanding how they get things done, where their resources come from, and then the pain points begin to come up naturally. So just understanding, and you have to be very vulnerable, and say, I don't know much about human trafficking, for example. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you do and how this could impact moving forward, what kind of things you need? The conversation just kind of snowballs from there. And the key question is, tell us about how you do your work. A lot of people, especially the federal government, when you're coming out to listen to them, that's like unheard of. Folks are like, what? And you don't have anything at stake, but wanting to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, I kind of have, let me offer maybe a slightly different perspective that no, definitely asking those open-ended questions I think is awesome, and you're always surprised at what people say. And a lot of times, actually, you end up finding out that there are a whole bunch of problems that you didn't even know about, that they just come out and kind of give you the lowdown. You kind of go, well, I can't solve all those things. So you actually often get more water, more floods going through the river than you're expecting. But I think that the broad question is a great question because it's a little bit of an art, and I think it's through trial and error that you figure it out. But one example is kind of, well, a team was thinking about vaccination, and they go out and they talk to folks, and they ask them, like former parents, tell me about your kid's immunization, and that was a great starting point. But there's so many different ways to go from that question, and so they had to kind of scope down a little bit from there because they were thinking more along the lines of how does this person actually keep track of vaccines, and how do they track their kids are vaccinated if they even want to do that. So they kind of had to narrow down from that more general question, but they did that through trial and error. So you're going to have this, you're going to have that balance provided to you by the the people you actually interview. They'll be your checks and balance. So you'll figure it out pretty quick when you need to change the scope of the question, I think. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but.
So it looks like we might have lost Jamie, but it's okay.
There he is. Okay.
Okay, he's back. Dan, that was yeah, totally got you there. And the scoping the questions is one of those. There's no right or wrong answer. You kind of have to just bumble your way through. And if you can't tell, we don't tell. There's not like steps 1 through 12 or 50 or even 100 because you have to sort of keep learning as you go. And not only learning like what you need to learn to accomplish your project or accomplish creating some kind of value, but also learning methodology as you go. I always try to think of everything as like we're teaching principles, and if you really want us to give you advice, then yeah, we could probably tell you the next step to take, but we're not always right either. We're not in your shoes. We're not out there talking to people. So really sort of pretty interesting question. It's probably very important for teams to hear on this. As from Angelica, basically, how do you get your management team on board with Ignite methodology, since it's so different from the standard government process as Reed shared earlier? So I think rather than thinking of it in terms of just the actual methodology that would confuse or otherwise bewilder or get some resistance from your supervisor or management team above that, just think of like just generally, like how are you supposed to go out there and do this Ignite project? It is so different. You might be trying to do something that's disruptive. What are your guys' thoughts on that? And did you experience anything like that, Jamie?
Yeah, that's a great question, Angelica, and a tough one. These are better than others. I think two things to focus on is that senior management is usually focused on results. Right? They're usually focused on something that they can prove is making a difference, and that is one great aspect of these iterative projects that you're working through, where you're getting a prototype in front of a customer to get their hands on and try out. Is that at any point if senior management checks it, you say, just give me a week, just give me 2 weeks, we'll have something for you. if they check back in with you, you've got something to show them. Reed said with 7 interviews, you should start to see trends. You'll be able to talk about those very quickly. Whereas some other projects, and you can probably figure out what they are around you, they're going to take a lot longer to yield better results. The other thing that there was a slide that Reed put up earlier that showed like government versus Ignite, and I really think that Ignite should be a combination of those 2 columns, because while qualifiable data is very important and this telling the story is really good for Ignite, if you've got the quantifiable data to put into your pain topic and to show why you need to do this, then that's going to speak to senior management as far as why what you're doing is important and why they should be on board with dedicating the resources to this.
You also have a group of people at the HHS IDEA Lab who have a lot of experience in this, and they have talked to supervisors in the past, and they kind of help elucidate where the program succeeds, and they do that through examples, because a lot of times examples, I think, bring people on board the quickest, and they're the people who are most familiar with the really good examples of their program. Also, it's a secretarial program, so I didn't particularly come up against people who were really jumping in our path to get in the way. I think that a lot of times, at least from CDC in my personal experience, that people go, oh, okay, they kind of step out of the way. They might not get the program and exactly what it does, but I think that the air cover that Ignite provides is pretty substantial.
If I can jump in real quick, I think you're right, Dan, but I think that there have been some projects in past rounds that it's not necessarily that the methodology is controversial, but that the project and the outcome they desire is controversial, and some of these projects uncover some things that need to be uncovered, and senior leadership isn't ready to promote that, and so they may, rather than just saying those words, I don't want you to show this to the world, they'll say, well, I don't like the methods. They may use it as an excuse and try to attack it from that. So, but you're absolutely right in that the IDEA Lab provides that air cover, and that was one of the main reasons my project went to Ignite.
I'm going to just add here that there's 2 critical things I think that are really important to leverage. First is the mentor. I had a tremendous mentor.
We're actually calling them coaches.
Oh, you're calling coaches? Okay. Well, my coach was phenomenal. All of my coaching, all the coaches I got. But in particular, the one that was assigned to me was phenomenal because number one, she understood more about the context of where I was working and what I was operating better than I did, having been new to the agency. The second thing that I think is really, really critical is the personas. The personas exercise kind of, when we're talking about impact, like there's a reason why we're doing the work for whatever it is. The impact of having a persona kind of embody all the pain points, and that there's a person assigned that's actually said those things, makes it a validation point. And when you are updating your senior managers about what you've coming up, where you are on your path, and what products and things that you've identified, it's actually pretty mind-blowing, even for the most experienced senior supervisor or senior leader. And I think those are 2 things that leveraging moving forward. You want to look at those tools to see how you can forward that and make sure that you remain on track and keep your senior leader engaged.
So there was a term in there, I think there's one quick follow-up that somebody asked, what is a persona exercise?
Oh.
Persona, just to quickly go over that, is to basically, if you've talked to enough people that you think that you're beginning to be able to sort of profile a person that will fit into your customer segment. Basically, it could be like, oh, they work in this kind of role within this kind of office, like they're like the finance dude who happens to also do data entry. That could be one of your personas. And then you go even further to try to understand that person, since we're so human-centered here. You're like, oh, that person has generally done this many years of graduate school work, and they also drive their 1992 Honda Accord. You know, like maybe not that deep, but stuff like that will be surprisingly create a lot of insight into your customer segment. I think Reed had a follow-up.
Yeah, I have a follow-up sort of related to this. Is sometimes it's a little tricky for folks that work in like the regulatory agencies, in particular if you're like an FDA and CMS. It comes up a lot. It may come up from others as well, but like, you know, can I talk to industry, right? So it's like a little bit touchier if there are major market implications, for example. The reality is that it might be a little bit touchier. You know, one thing that's really important is that if you're reaching out to people outside of government, characterize your introduction as just you. You know, being just being you. That, you know, yeah, you have this project today that's been accepted in this program, and sort of reaching out. Do not pretend like you're representing, you know, the FDA, right? Or, you know, don't accidentally pretend that you're representing CMS. And you know, we've noticed that a lot of folks that are in these regulatory agencies actually, you know, they get this sort of like weird response to people that are outside. Let's say they like work in a hospital and they're like, oh my gosh, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services has reached out to us for comment. You know, so it's a little hard to disarm and invoke sort of an individual to individual conversation when the traditional model is government to industry. So if you feel like you're sort of caught in that world, we can help sort of do that dance and figure out how to navigate that a little bit further. You just reach out to us separately for a conversation.
Thank you. So not to get away too much, I just got really excited by a question that just came in from Sarah. I've heard you guys talk a lot about solving a problem for people. What if what you are proposing is a service that doesn't necessarily solve a problem, but perhaps expands an opportunity? I like to call those unmet needs. Sometimes unmet needs are invisible, but perhaps expands opportunities and possibilities for people. I'm having some trouble seeing how that fits in. So that's kind of like your, well, what did the guys who created Facebook go and say like, oh, there's a problem that we need to fix? Like, no, not necessarily, not literally. I think maybe Dan could really shed some light on that, because again, it's not like, oh, major pain point, go fix this problem for me. It's kind of like there's sort of an invisible opportunity that maybe we think we have, we know something about.
Yeah, sure, happy to take it. It's a great, phenomenal question. A lot of times I think when we're talking, you can replace solve a problem with, you know, you think need and problem, I think are a lot of times does something, do you want to do something, or do you need to do it? I mean, a lot of those things are the same thing in this particular example. There was this quote that was attributed to Henry Ford that he turns out he never actually said, but it was, he would go, you know, he'd say that if I asked people if they wanted if they wanted to go faster, they'd say I'd want a faster horse, but what they actually need was a car. So definitely those needs. A lot of times people will even say that the needs are even more powerful than solving people's particular painful problems. And social media is a great example of that, where they met this need of people to wanting to connect and to needing to connect together, rather than solving a particular painful issue in AOL Instant Messenger or something like that.
But Dan, to the question that was just up about senior management, do you think that those are harder sells, like helping them realize the need that is or is not there?
So that's a wonderful point to make, Jamie, and I think that gets into, if people are wondering why we care so much about the different customer segments, it's because we care about having to create value for all those different people. So the person who goes onto Facebook, like that person cares enough because they want to like, you know, feel connected, do things that way. But for the person, but for the mom or dad who's saying like, my kid spends way too much time on Facebook, there also has to be some other value proposition that you make to them, and and they have a different concern, right? And so for senior management to say like, oh, basically don't expect them to share the same value. I mean, you have to be able to calculate that. Let's say it is about Facebook. Well, let's say Facebook for HHS which is kind of maybe a yammer. You say, well, senior leadership, look at all the connectivity that's happening. Look at maybe some measurable things that people are doing as far as collaboration that they weren't doing before. Whereas actual people using Yammer might be like, yeah, this is great. I get to meet people, and I get to figure out where the notary is in my building. But that's value too. You communicate it differently, and you figure out exactly what those people care about in order to see, okay, does this solution align with all the different needs that these different customers have?
I think Jamie made a good point, which is maybe if it's something they've never thought about before, or you're like kind of, I guess the business term would be like creating a new market. If you're kind of establishing something that hasn't been done before, that potentially it's harder for people to see your vision for it. With that being said, I don't think that you're always going to be doing that. I think that sometimes unmet needs are actually very easy to get, and so are problems. But yeah, potentially if you're doing something really, really brand new or disruptive or creating a completely new thing, that can be harder to sell, for sure.
But then, Daniel, what you touched on makes me think about in creating a demand, period. Like it's the external outside, and that forces you to tailor your strategy and your solution. And so simply by engaging them, there's a potential, but like really saying, we know that this is important to all of these different customer segments, and that's why we've created the demand. That's what comes to mind just as you were talking.
Hey, just a quick shout out to Jim, who posted in the questions box to us that he's already done 8 interviews since Tuesday, which is pretty impressive. Yeah, thumbs up. This question about like themes and quantity is a big part of that. So just a shout out to them, to Jim.
No pressure to everybody else.
I know, right? Overachiever.
Well, I was going to say the C students would do the 10 interviews. The 10 interviews, it's hard to get a lot of patterns, I think, with that few of interviews and when you kind of stink it up in the beginning. So.
Yeah, awesome. We generally say that if you get the right people, like 6 to 8 interviews will get you like more than 80% of what you get from everyone. But you have to also figure out if those are the right people or not. They all fit within that same sort of segment. They don't, and you often are just kind of figuring that out as you go. So
that's a good point. The people that are the wrong people, those numbers don't count, folks.
It's okay if you don't know that right away. We'll still count it as one of your 10.
But you are trying to see if you start hearing the same thing over and over again. At some point, that's when you know that you're onto the right thing.
Great. Bunch of other questions, all really good. There's a question, pretty pointed, like this. Anybody have any experience with interviewing senior leadership? This is from Chris. Any recommendations? Christopher Riddler. I mean, everyone did a Shark Tank here. They had to talk to a senior leader.
Yeah. I interviewed our bureau director for mine, and it's a much more formal thing. Like, we made sure we were much more prepared with our questions. We kind of did a dry run. We thought about what we might hear from them. We were pretty close. I think that it's an important question for the very end, and it's an important question whether you're interviewing a senior leader or anyone else, but I think a senior leader is going to give a better answer than most when you ask, what should I have asked you? What else could we have talked about in this time? And if you think it's worth talking about, can we set up a follow-up session? Because they have some of the best insight into your problem.
My particular project, we were looking at some big issues because we were thinking about, why don't good ideas happen? All the stuff that Reed presented, and that wasn't quite as clear to us in the beginning. So we ended up interviewing the head for policy for CDC, and yeah, you definitely want to be prepared. And I think most of the time, though, you really don't need to be interviewing those senior leaders unless you have a particular project which is addressing their needs. I think that it elevates the importance of of the particular interview, and probably for these interviews that you want to be doing, you want to get probably more from the experts and the people who are really the subject matter folks who really know their stuff rather than kind of the broad brush leadership strokes. I think at least in the beginning. So I would maybe even talk to Will or your coaches if you're thinking about interviewing a senior leader, at least in these first 10 interviews.
Yeah, I would agree. We had senior leaders near the end of the project, and at that point, what was really helpful for us is that we learned a lot about resources external to our agency that could really be leveraged, which is the whole point of why we were doing the project in the first place. It was phenomenal feedback, and it was more on the solution end, and I think the piece in there, they do have a lot of insight. They probably understand a lot of the barriers, but again, trying to tailor what you're planning and preparing, that would not make them, they're an important segment, but they should really be a secondary segment. And when we start looking at how the segments are prioritized, you'll know where the senior leaders are.
Right. It's sort of a check, mark the box, make sure they're not opposed. If they can be a help, that's huge. Mm-hmm. But often they're not one of the first people you go to. They're one of the last people you go to. So we're going to wrap up a little bit. Thank you so much to you guys on the panel. Any parting thoughts that you wanted to be covered before we left? Just have at it. Just try to keep it somewhat short.
Your mentor is your best cheerleader ever, and the entire coach. The best, and every question that the IDEA Lab asks you is something developmental for you. I will say that this has been personal development for me, being in Ignite, and it just expanded my knowledge of self just as much as it did about the problem that we're trying to tackle. And I think that is something that very few opportunities, even when you're in a learning management system portal with a whole curriculum, that's something that you walk away with that you didn't anticipate. So just be open and free and accepting of everything that comes your way because it's purpose.
It's awesome. You do have access to a whole bunch of amazing people. My, I guess, manifesto for Ignite would be humility and exploration. I think through testing your assumptions and viewing things through a hypothesis lens rather than a rule of gravity lens, I think really pays off dividends huge in the end of this thing. And it kind of, with 3 months of perseverance and the right timing, you could look like an overnight success when you come out of the end of this thing. And it's, I think that really embrace it and really enjoy your time in it, even though it is real stressful.
It's not that bad. I would just follow up with a kind of a mix of what we've heard both in the beginning and the end of the panel discussion, in that completely let go, like Tish said, in terms of the methodology, but also kind of to what Dan said, completely let go in terms of hearing about your problem, because you have an assumption right now, and that assumption has gotten you to where you are, but you might be wrong. So when you're listening to your customers, kind of let go of your assumptions to hear their point of view, because they're the ones usually feeling that pain. Awesome.
Again, thank you guys so much for being on the panel, answering awesome questions. And of course, thank you so much for the questions that are coming in. There's a lot more we couldn't get to, but they're very important, so thank you so much. We're going to use all this stuff to create FAQs and make sure we get all our talking points eventually, too. So thank you for folks in the audience.
I think we can say goodbye to the panel. Thank all them. You guys are great today.
Dan, Jamie, Tish, thank you so much.
We can spend a couple minutes, because a number of the questions that came in were sort of administrative in nature, and or they're looking for particular thing. So let me just try to hit on a couple of those as our closing comments here. There's a question about actually receiving a coach. So there's a little bit of a distinction that we should certainly make here. This is the first time we're doing this finalist phase, so this is a little exploratory for us. In the Ignite Accelerator program itself, right, this is what you guys are going to be pitching for. All teams selected Nevada are assigned an innovation coach. The way this works during the finalist phase, it's looser. So we're not assigning everybody a coach. Rather, we're sort of making all of the coaches as well as the larger alumni network available to you guys. And that's the list of all of the former project leads that have gone through Ignite are on a PDF that are posted on the Ignite webpage. Following this, I'll be taking that particular slide, and maybe I'll actually pull it up right now as well, and can ensure that you guys can see these folks as well. Yeah, so I'll be posting this on our website. Also, let's see, a couple of the questions that were here. When are the office hours? So we have, thank you, Captain Nelson, for that question. So there are a couple of ways where you can actually get in touch with people. You should feel free and indeed empowered to reach out to any of the former project leads, anybody in the alumni network, or any of these innovation coaches or contacts that you see here, and just sort of work with them and find the time that works with both of you guys. The other thing that we can do is, so we are hosting what we're calling office hours, and there's actually a link that is up on the IDEA Lab website. The Being a Finalist tab on the Ignite web page. Towards the bottom of that, mentioned this a couple times, but keep that at top of mind. All of the resources, all the materials from all of these webinars are there. And there's a link to a Doodle poll. If you're not familiar with Doodle, it's you just basically go on, you type in your name, you like select the slot for works for you, and we'll actually then reach out to you and find someone who would have the time to speak with you then. A couple of you already done that. Awesome, thank you. To others that are thinking about an office hour, yeah, click on that Doodle and do schedule a time with us. I believe Doodle is blocked at FDA. By the way, if anybody wants a good Ignite project, getting Doodle unblocked at FDA would be a pretty good one. That's been a long-standing conversation I've been having with them. So if you're at FDA, just reach out to us directly. Again, at the idealab@hhs.gov email address, and we'll work with you there. Let's see. We will be posted. We can post like an FAQ up on site as well, just to be sure all of this is captured. There's a question here from Chris. Did you deliver the questions prior to the meeting? Chris, I'm not really sure I understand what you're saying there, so just jump back in if you don't mind clarifying that. Mitra asks, can the pitch in February be given by all the team members, or is it preferred that the project lead present? So we'll provide much more guidance around what that February pitch looks like. The preference is that everybody that's on the team, who ends up being on the team at that point, is there, and that's because a large part of our philosophy is that we're not just selecting the project, we are selecting the project team. In the same way that many of you are going to be probably shifting and pivoting over the next couple months, there's going to be opportunity to shift and pivot even if selected in. And so it's almost even a hiring process for us in many ways. It's a sort of interview, although through the lens of your actual Ignite project. Okay, so we're going to wrap that up. We'll say thanks to everybody that joined. Huge thanks again to our panel members. Thanks to Will our Uber mentor here for moderating that. We had a number of sort of kickoff meetings that took place at different locations around the main campus areas of the department. Huge thanks for getting those set up. There was another little sort of experiment that we threw in there, and we'll find time to debrief around that. We'll probably plan on doing those again in January. So if you are around one of the main campus areas of any of the major operatives, be on the lookout for updates towards that January 12th webinar. We can do some stuff in person for folks that are remote and or in regions. Of course, we'll be doing, we'll have this webinar available for you to join remotely as well. But the next major milestone, the next place where we will all be reconvening is going to be on January 12th. In the meantime, go out there, find your customers, talk to them, try to learn a little bit from them. Have a great holiday season as well. And yeah, happy Thursday. We'll talk to you later.